Hello and welcome to the Business Today show. I'm your host Udayan Mukherjee. India has a power problem, and not of the kind that you've been hearing about in the news over the last few days of the power problems in Delhi. The problem is much bigger. It is that much of India's power is actually dirty. 60% plus of our power comes from fossil fuels, which is coal, lignite, diesel, all the things which are terribly polluting, and only about a quarter comes from renewable sources like wind, like solar, like hydro, which is the kind of power we want. But now all of India's big industrial groups are getting behind this problem, from the Ambanis to the Adanis to the Tatas. They're all getting into this renewable game. But what made news a few weeks back was that India's first renewable energy company got listed on the Nasdaq, and it was from a relatively younger company called ReNew Power. And my guest on the show today is actually a kind of a poster boy of renewable energy from India. Sumant Sinha is the founder and chairman and CEO of ReNew Power, which got listed on the Nasdaq. Sumant, it's very good to have you on the show. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, Udayan. Thank you so much for having me on your program.
You know, in the Sinha family which you come from, power means something else. Your father is Yashwant Sinha, the former finance minister. Your brother Jayant Sinha is a prominent member of the current government. But you eschewed that kind of power to get into renewable power. Tell us why.
I think the best kind of power there is the renewable kind. There's so much that you can do. But let me take a step back. The question really is why renewable energy and why am I getting into it? I think the reasons basically are the following: that renewable energy is the need of the hour. You talked about the fact that India's energy consumption is very heavily skewed towards fossil fuels, which it is. We all know that, and that's really dangerous in today's day and age in terms of climate change and pollution. And therefore, there is a very significant need for us to change the energy paradigm in India, certainly, and elsewhere in the world as well. And we are therefore in the midst of this massive energy transition where we're moving from fossil fuel-based energy systems to clean energy-based energy systems. And not a moment too soon, actually, because of the issues of climate change and so on. And this is a very exciting change that is happening. It's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of change that is upon us at this point. And because I was in this sector and I could see it happening, it seemed to me to make eminent sense to devote my career to this sector and really to doing good in a different way, doing good in a way of creating jobs, to clean up the environment, to provide energy for a growing country like India. I think that's really the path that I embarked on. And as you know, there are many ways of doing good, and certainly the way that I have chosen to me seems like a very sensible way of getting to that same end out.
Well, it's a commendable path, but investors in India might hold a grouse against you. There are very few renewable energy assets to invest in India, but you chose to go all the way to the Nasdaq to list. I can understand there were good reasons for it, but why not consider an IPO in India and give Indian investors the chance of investing in your company?
Yeah, look, Udin, that's a great question, of course, and we considered listing in India very seriously as well. And keep in mind that our decision was being made somewhere towards the end of last year, almost a year ago, at which time the environment in India was quite different. So that is one thing, I think. The second thing, of course, is that ESG investing globally has really, really picked up. And global investors are looking very seriously at good investment opportunities. And for us, to take the Indian opportunity to global investors and to tell them about how rapidly the Indian market was growing, what the opportunities were, what the government's program was to convert the energy system here towards renewable energy, and to give them the chance of investing in India and to invest in a reasonable sized company like ours, it seemed to make a lot of sense. And from our standpoint, what we get is access to a deep liquid pool of investors, which hopefully can help us in the future as well to raise capital. Which is not to say that we mightn't have had the same opportunity in India, but it is just that to us, global investors seemed more aware of the changing dynamic in the energy industry, and also with their focus, as I said earlier, on ESG investing, seem to provide a better receptivity to a story like ours, which is why we decided to list outside of India.
Very quickly, I want to touch upon the route that you took, because it was like a merger with what we'd like to call a blank check company in RMG, and you got listed through that route. Do you think a lot of Indian unicorns today, from various sectors, now having seen what you've done, might actually explore that route to get listing overseas?
Yeah, they could, Udayan. There's no reason for them not to. Having said that, markets are volatile, and at a certain point in time in the US market, SPACs were a very attractive way to get to the market, and a number of companies, as you know, took that path, including ours, to become public. I think today the attractiveness of SPACs has come down, and SPAC investors have become a lot more selective, and so therefore they will look carefully at any new investment opportunity. And so therefore I think whichever Indian company wants to go down that path should obviously examine the market carefully.
Now let's get back to the problem that we started with, which is India's fossil fuel power problem. Now, renewable energy is what, about a quarter of the overall market size now. How soon do you see this transition happening? I mean, how soon can that 60% of dirty power come down to say 30-40% and renewable energy get up to 50% plus? How many years will this take, you think?
Yeah, first of all, I would hesitate to call it dirty power, Udayan, simply because it's coal-based power. Of course, it emits carbon, so to that extent, it's not the cleanest source of energy, but it is the source that has stood India in good stead so far. And India, as you said, still relies on that for 60-65% of our total power generation, and that will continue to be the case for some time. Now, today, renewable energy, only wind and solar, accounts for about 10% of India's total power generation. If I add hydro, then that of course increases to the number that you mentioned, which is about 25%. But the government has set a fairly ambitious target by 2030 to get the existing installed wind and solar capacity of 100 gigawatts up to about 450 gigawatts by 2030, which would essentially mean that the 10% of today would become about 30 to 35% by 2030. Now, if I add hydro to the mix at that point, that number will probably go to closer to 50%. But the balance 50% will still continue to come from coal. The reason for that is that India's power demand is going to grow very significantly over the next several years. So even though we're adding tremendous amounts of new capacity on renewables, power demand is also growing. And therefore, the two will in some ways balance each other out. And so coal will therefore still be there till about 2030. Now the question is what happens post 2030? After that, I think that renewables will become so much cheaper. The intermittency issue of renewables will start getting addressed through much cheaper storage, battery solutions, and so on. And post 2030, I would imagine that we'll start looking at replacing legacy coal assets, which by that time, a lot of them would be nearing the end of their normal life cycle in any case. And so from 2030 to 2040, I would see that 50% number, including hydro, would probably grow to 70-80%, if not more.
Let me ask you, I mean, where will ReNew power fit in? Let's assume that you're right, and by 2030, 50% of India's power comes from solar, from wind, and from hydro, the three put together. Of that 50%, how much do you think ReNew power will be? What would be your market share?
Yeah, so let's leave out the hydro part, because that is already, those capacities have already been put up, right? And a lot of those are owned by various public sector companies. Of course, there's some in the private sector as well. But I don't see a lot of new hydro getting built out, because hydro is expensive for new capacities. It takes time to build out, and there are various construction issues. So I doubt you'll have a lot more new hydro capacity getting built out. Now, as far as wind and solar is concerned, we have so far been having about a 10% market share of the total capacity. So of the 100 gigawatts, we have approximately an 8-9 gigawatt capacity, and we've been winning market share at about 10% for the last several years. So I would say that if I just sort of fast forward that number, it is quite conceivable for us to have that same percentage by the time we get to 2030, right? Or it could be a little bit more depending on how well we're able to implement, how the market shapes up, and so on. So I would say that's really where we would like to be. And given the large size of the market, This additional 350 gigawatts that we have to set up of wind and solar capacity will require almost $300 billion of total investment. That's a big number. And I think it's going to be beyond the ability of any one company to be setting up large parts of that. And so therefore, I think, having a reasonably good market share of that we have right now would probably be something that would make a lot of sense even by 2030.
I also see that the big guns are getting into this business in a big way. I mean, Reliance bought REC Solar for $771 million just the other day. The Adanis are interested, Tatas are getting in a big way. But as you say, the market is very large. But do you think you would have access to capital to stand toe to toe with these people who have far greater access to capital because of the industrial groups that they represent? Do you think ReNew will remain a significant player in the solar business or in the wind business in the next decade or so?
So then that's obviously the big $1 million question from our standpoint. And of course, from our standpoint, we intend to be one of the big players in the industry, even going forward. And the reasons for that are multiple. I think the first is that, it's not just about capital, it's also about expertise, it's also about capability. And I think, we've been operating in the sector now for the last 10 years. That gives us a tremendous amount of knowledge about the industry. It gives us a tremendous knowledge about how wind capacities work, how solar works, how they both interface with each other, how to come up with solutions that combine different sources of energy, renewable energy together, along with storage. So we've built a number of capabilities in those areas that I think will stand us in good stead in the future. The second thing is, as a company, we've raised almost $8 billion of capital in the last 10 years, right? From a startup situation. Now we're a reasonably well-established company. So there's no reason that we can't raise, multiple times of that over the next 10 years. And so therefore, if you look at the plans that some of our big competitors have laid out, we are not going to be that far away from them just in terms of total capital that we are likely to be able to invest over this time period. At this point, the ability of thinking a little bit innovatively, thinking differently, because of our understanding of the power markets in the country, and so on. And this is the only business that we have. And so therefore, we're going to make sure that 100% of our time is devoted to this business, whereas all the other guys have multiple other businesses to look at as well.
Will you be focused mostly on India, Sumant, or do you have international aspirations? Because, in 2008, you were the chief operating officer of Suzlon, and they bought RE Power, they bought Hansen. It did not work out for Suzlon quite as well as they might have thought it would. But would you want to go down that path, pick up international assets as well in wind and solar?
Yeah, so then let me answer that question a little bit more broadly and say that there are a number of new areas that are opening up in our sector. Green hydrogen is the most obvious one. Storage is another one. There is the whole area of mobility. At some point, the power market in India will get opened up on the distribution side. So that's something that we could be looking at. On the transmission side, now, or more or less, all the transmission that is going to be built in India is going to be to service renewable energy assets. That's a market that we've now got into. We won our first bid on the transmission side recently. And so there are many different kinds of opportunities that we have at this point in time that we are in fact examining very seriously. International is one of those kinds of opportunities, and we'll obviously look at the international markets very seriously. In fact, we are, and I think we'll take decisions as we go forward. But the point to make really is that this sector is not just about setting up wind and solar assets. It's really broadening out a lot more. The energy markets are opening up. They are going to be the next big growth opportunity in India. And I think we as a company, now being one of the biggest power sector companies in India, across both conventional and renewable, puts us in terrific position to take advantage of some of these opportunities, both in India as well as outside. So to answer your question, yes, I think we would be looking at markets outside India as well.
You touched upon a very important point, Sumant, and I was going to come to it. I mean, this Electricity Amendment Bill of 2021, it has some really radical kind of proposals that, new private companies can actually compete with legacy discoms, that consumers can actually choose their distributor. Do you see opportunity as a company at ReNew Power with these? I mean, are you going to actually participate in these things if they were to come about as proposed?
the proposals that have been made in the Electricity Act are actually phenomenal. And it is very critical and very urgent for the government to actually pass the Electricity Act, because that actually puts choice in the hands of consumers. And of course, states will not be happy with that because it'll mean that they lose control. But I think in the interest of developing the Indian economy further and in the interest of the consumer, I think that is something that we must do. Now, in addition to that, the Electricity Act also has a number of other very positive features. So, all in all, I would say the Electricity Act amendment does need to be passed very quickly by the government. It's going to be very positive for the sector as a whole, and I think will actually almost take the entire Indian economy onto a different trajectory. Now, would we as a company participate in the distribution sector? We definitely would consider it very seriously. In fact, there were a couple of privatizations that happened of some union territories, and we did try to participate in those. Unfortunately, we didn't win. But it's a part of the power sector that we definitely want to look at very seriously.
Speaking of which, I mean, how much of your aspirations will be captured in the inorganic space? I mean, you have picked up some assets in Uttarakhand, in Telangana, at ReNew Power. I mean, do you see the inorganic possibility as a big one for your company? Because you could potentially go about buying assets internationally and in India. Would you consider that?
No, you're absolutely right, Udayan, and we absolutely would consider doing M&A to grow inorganically as well. Ultimately, our desire is to add more assets to our portfolio, and we can do that organically, but we can equally do that inorganically. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the renewable energy sector right now, we are the largest company in the space, but our market share is only about 8%. And that tells you that it's a very fragmented market. There are many players, a lot of companies trying to come in and create a business in this area. And a lot of companies have a model of just building and then selling assets. And some of them will do it voluntarily, some of them will do it involuntarily because they just weren't able to execute well. And so therefore, there is going to be a fair bit of churn in our sector. And that churn is going to give us opportunity to acquire assets and grow inorganically as well.
At this point, we'll slip into a short break, but we shall return with Sumant Sinha, founder and CEO of ReNew Power, in just a minute. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching the Business Today show. I've been in conversation with Sumant Sinha, founder, chairman and CEO of ReNew Power, which got listed on the Nasdaq, the first Indian renewable energy company to do that. A larger part of your career was the Aditya Birla Group. I mean, you were the CFO for a long time. You handled set up their retail business. And it struck me the other day when, the possibility of speaking to you, that I should also ask you, you would have been in the hot seat at Aditya Birla Group today if Kumar Mangalam Birla were to ask someone what to do with Vodafone Idea. You were the go-to man then. What would you have told him? Because he's walking away, it seems, from Vodafone Idea. He doesn't want to put in any more capital. What would your advice to him at this juncture would have been?
Then I wish I could have given him some advice, but again, the reality is that I have not been in the telecom sector for many years. I last worked in the Aditya Birla Group almost 13 years ago. And of course, at that time, the telecom sector was taking off, and I was a big votary when I was in the group that the group should stay in telecom. But of course, the whole landscape, the whole environment has changed over the last so many years. So I don't know. I would not have been able to give him advice without having been, actually in the telecom sector, working with him for some time. Because it's not just a question of what's happening in the sector, it's also a question of what's happening in the rest of the group, and how is the group positioned and what the thinking is about growth areas and so on. So you can't just, give that advice in isolation. So I would hesitate to be able to give you any answer on that.
Okay, let me go back to my first question to you then. How is it in the family for you guys? Your father is now with the Trinamool Congress. He was a prominent political leader. Your brother had 12 years in McKinsey before he chose to get back into the political path. It's fascinating for us on the outside to think of what dinner table conversations would be like between the two sons and the father. What is it like?
Well, Udayan, the good thing is we seldom have dinners together. And so therefore we very, rarely get together to have any kind of conversations. And I think just as well, because all of us have such differing views on so many issues that it would not lead to a very constructive conversation. So I think, look, we're all professionals. We're all, doing our own thing in our own different ways, and we keep our professional side very separate from the personal side. It may be hard to believe for a lot of people who are looking at it from the outside, but frankly speaking, between my father and myself, he's run his professional career totally separately from me. I have not had any visibility into what he's been up to or what he's thinking of or what he's doing, and obviously no ability to influence. And the same thing with my brother. I think he does whatever he thinks is appropriate from his standpoint. So I think from that standpoint, we are all very, very separate individuals.
So finally, if I were to ask you, Sumant, I mean, since this is your big game in life, I mean, you've had a corporate career, but this is your baby. I mean, this is entrepreneurship. Where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? And if I had to ask you for a very brief mission statement or vision statement, what are you trying to create with ReNew Power? What is the scale of your ambition?
Oh, then that's really, really a terrific question. And that's something obviously that I've thought about many, many times. And you're absolutely right. ReNew is my baby. It's grown much faster and much more than I had ever thought when I started the company. My aspirations have obviously grown over time with what we have been able to achieve at ReNew. New horizons have always continued to open up as our sector has grown and as our company has grown. And I'm sure that will continue to happen in the future as well. But since you've asked me the question right now, let me try to respond about where I am right now. So look, we are at this point close to a $5 billion market cap company, about $9 billion enterprise value. We have, as I said, close to a 10% market share of the Indian renewables market, which itself is growing rapidly. What I'd like to do essentially is to help India in this energy transition. I think it's going to be a mammoth task. And as I said earlier, it's a once in a lifetime task. But I think it's a very, very critical thing for us to do, because the choices that India makes on our energy systems are going to be very fundamental in the world's battle against climate change. Because India is already 8% of carbon emissions globally. And because we are growing so rapidly, given our pace of development, that percentage is going to keep going up. And we can't let that happen. And at the same time, we can't also prevent growth from happening. We have to, given the standards of life and the economic per capita incomes and so on, we have to make sure that Indians have the unfettered right to grow. And therefore, converting our energy systems from carbon-based to clean-based systems, I think, is a very important aspect. And I think if I can contribute to that in some measure, that would be a job well done.
I'm sure you'll go on to do that, Sumant. The journey has just begun, and it's begun very well for you. So I wish you all the best, and may you go on to achieve all that you have in mind, your vision and mission plan. Thank you very much for taking time out for us today.
Thank you so much, Udayan. Such a pleasure talking to you as always, and it was great to be here.
Thank you. That was Sumant Sinha. We shall return next week with another prominent personality from the world of business. Till then.